10. Every house is an architecturally structured path. The specific possibilities of movement and the drives toward movement as one proceeds from the entrance through the sequence of spatial entities have been predetermined by the architectural structuring of that space, and one experiences the space accordingly. But at the same time, in its relation to the surrounding space, it is a goal, and we either advance towards this goal or depart from it. Dagobert Frey, Grundlegung zu einer vergleichenden Kunstwissenschaft. Karen may lose herself in resentment and fear, but the Navidson we see seems joyful, even euphoric, as he sets out with Reston and his brother to rescue Holloway and his team. It is almost as if entrance, let alone a purpose, any purpose, in the face of those endless and lightless regions, is reason enough to rejoice. Using 16mm motion picture, color and black and white, and 35mm stills, Navidson for the first time begins to capture the size and sense of that place. Author Denise Lowry writes the following evocative impression of how Navidson photographs the anteroom. The hot red flame spits out light, catching on Tom, entwining in the spokes of Reston's wheelchair, casting shape changes and dragons on a nearby wall. But even this watery dance succeeds in only illuminating a tiny portion of the corner. Navidson, Tom, and Reston continue forward beneath those gables of gloom and the walls buttressed with shadow, lighting more flares, penetrating this world with their halogen lamps, until finally what seemed undefinable comes forth out of the shimmering blank, implacable, and now nothing less than obvious and undeniable, as if there never could have been a question about the shape. There never could have been a moment when only the imagination succeeded in prodding those inky folds, coming up with its own sense. Something far more perverse and contorted and heavy with things much stranger and colder than even this brief shadow play performed in the irregular burn of sulfur. Mythic and inhuman, flickering, shifting, and finally dying around the men's continuous progress. Of course, the great hall dwarfs even this chamber. As Holloway reported in Exploration 2, its span approaches 1 mile, making it practically impossible to illuminate. Instead, the trio slips straight through the black, carefully marking their way with ample fishing line, until the way ahead suddenly reveals an even greater darkness, pitted in the center of that immense, incomprehensible space. In one photograph of the great hall, we find Reston in the foreground holding a flare, the light barely licking an ashen wall rising above him into inky oblivion, while in the background Tom stands surrounded by flares which just as ineffectually confront the impenetrable wall of nothingness looming around the spiral staircase. As Chris Tyle remarks, the great hall feels like the inside of some preternatural hull designed to travel vast seas never before observed in this world. Since rescuing Holloway's team is the prime objective, Navidson takes very few photographs. Luckily for us, however, the beginning of the sequence relies almost entirely on these scarce but breathtaking stills instead of the far more abundant but vastly inferior videotapes, which are used here mainly to provide sound. Eventually, when they realize Holloway and his team are nowhere near the Great Hall, the plan becomes for Reston to set up camp at the top of the stairway, while Navidson and Tom continue on below. Switching to High 8, we follow Navidson and Reston as they react to Tom's announcement. "Bullshit," Navidson barks at his brother. "Navy, I can't go down there," Tom stammers. "What's that supposed to mean? You're just giving up on them?" Fortunately, by barely touching his friend's arm, Billy Reston forces Navidson to take a good hard look at his brother. As we can see for ourselves, he is pale, out of breath, and in spite of the cold, sweating profusely, clearly in no condition to go any further, let alone tackle the profound depths of that staircase. Navidson takes a deep breath. Sorry, Tom. I didn't mean to snap at you like that. Tom says nothing. Do you think you can stay here with Billy, or do you want to head home? You'll have to make it back on your own. I'll stay here. With Billy? Reston responds. What's that supposed to mean? The hell if you think I'm letting you go on alone. But Navidson has already started down the spiral staircase. I should sue the bastards who designed this house, Reston shouts after him. Haven't they heard of handicap ramps? The dark minutes start to slide by. Based on Holloway's descent, Navidson had estimated the stairway was an incredible 13 miles down. Less than 5 minutes later, however, Tom and Reston hear a shout. Peering over the banister, they discover Navidson with a light stick in his hand, standing at the bottom, no more than 100 feet down. Tom immediately assumes they have stumbled upon the wrong set of stairs. Further investigation by Navidson, though, reveals the remnants of neon trail markers left by Holloway's team. Without another word, Reston swings out of his chair and starts down the stairs. Less than 20 minutes later, he reaches the last step. Navidson knows he has no choice but to accept Reston's participation and heads back up to retrieve the wheelchair and the rest of their gear. Amazingly enough, Tom seems fine camping near the staircase. Both Navidson and Reston hope his presence will enable them to maintain radio contact for a much longer time than Holloway could, even if they both know the house will still eventually devour their signal. As Navidson and Reston head out into the labyrinth, they occasionally come upon pieces of neon marker and shreds of various types of fishing line. Not even multi-strand steel line seems immune to the diminishing effects of that place. It looks like it's impossible to leave a lasting trace here, Navidson observes. The woman you never want to meet, quips Reston, always managing to keep his wheelchair a little ahead of Navidson. Soon, however, Reston begins to suffer from nausea and even vomits. Navidson asks him if he is sick. Reston shakes his head. No, it's more... Shit, I haven't felt this way since I went fishing for marlin. Navidson speculates Reston's seasickness, or his mal de mer, as he calls it, may have something to do with the changing nature of the house. Everything here is constantly shifting. It took Holloway, Jed, and Wax almost 4 days to reach the bottom of the staircase, and yet we made it down in 5 minutes. The thing collapsed like an accordion. Then, looking over at his friend, you realize if it expands again, you're in deep shit. Considering our supplies, Reston shoots back, I'd say we'd both be in deep shit. As was already mentioned in Chapter 3, some critics believe the house's mutations reflect the psychology of anyone who enters it. Dr. Haugeland asserts that the extraordinary absence of sensory information forces the individual to manufacture his or her own data. If one accepts Dell's reading, then it follows that Holloway's creature comes from Holloway's mind, not the house. The tiny room Wax finds himself trapped within reflects his own state of exhaustion and despair, and Navidson's rapid descent reflects his own knowledge that the spiral staircase is not bottomless. As Dr. Haugeland observes, the epistemology of the house remains entirely commensurate with its size. After all, one always approaches the unknown with greater caution the first time around. Thus it appears far more expansive than it literally is. Knowledge of the terrain on a second visit dramatically contracts this sense of distance. Who has never gone for a walk through some unfamiliar park and felt that it was huge, only to return a second time to discover that the park is in fact much smaller than initially perceived? When revisiting places we once frequented as children, it is not unusual to observe how much smaller everything seems. This experience has too often been attributed to the physical differences between a child and an adult. In fact, it has more to do with epistemological dimensions than with bodily dimensions. Knowledge is hot water on wool. It shrinks time and space. Admittedly, there is the matter where boredom, due to repetition, stretches time and space. I will deal specifically with this problem in a later chapter entitled Ennui. When Holloway's team traveled down the stairway, they have no idea if they would find a bottom. Navidson, however, knows the stairs are finite, and therefore has far less anxiety about the descent. Unlike the real world, Navidson's journey into the house is not just figuratively, but literally shortened. This theme of structures altered by perception is not uniquely observed in the Navidson record. Almost 30 years ago, Gunther Nitschke described what he termed experienced or concrete space. It has a center which is perceiving man, and it therefore has an excellent system of directions which changes with the movements of the human body. It is limited and in no sense neutral. In other words, it is finite, heterogeneous, subjectively defined and perceived. Distances and directions are fixed relative to man. Christian Norberg Schultz objects, condemning subjective architectural experiences for the seemingly absurd conclusion it suggests, mainly that architecture comes into being only when experienced. Norberg Schultz asserts, architectural space certainly exists independently of the casual perceiver and has centers and directions of its own. Focusing on the constructions of any civilization, whether ancient or modern, it is hard to disagree with him. It is only when focusing on Navidson's house that these assertions begin to blur. Can Navidson's house exist without the experience of itself? Is it possible to think of that place as unshaped by human perceptions? Especially since everyone entering there finds a vision almost completely, though pointedly not completely, different from anyone else's. Even Michael Leonard, who had never heard of Navidson's house, professed a belief in the psychological dimensions of space. Leonard claimed people create a sensation of space where the final result in the perceptual process is a single sensation, a feeling about that particular place. In his book, The Image of the City, Kevin Lynch suggested emotional cognition of all environment was rooted in history, or at least personal history. Environmental image, a generalized mental picture of the exterior physical world, is the product both of immediate sensation and of the memory of past experience, and is used to interpret information and to guide action. Italics added, for emphasis. Or, as Jean Piaget insisted, it is quite obvious that the perception of space involves a gradual construction, and certainly does not exist ready-made at the outset of mental development. Like Leonard's attention to sensation and Piaget's emphasis on constructed perception, Lynch's emphasis on the importance of the past allows him to introduce a certain degree of subjectivity to the question of space, and more precisely, architecture. Where Navidson's house is concerned, subjectivity seems more a matter of degree. The infinite corridor, the anteroom, the great hall, and the spiral staircase exist for all, though their respective size and even layout sometimes changes. Other areas of that place, however, never seem to replicate the same pattern twice, or so the film repeatedly demonstrates. No doubt speculation will continue for a long time over what force alters and orders the dimensions of that place, but even if the shifts turn out to be some kind of absurd interactive Rorschach test resulting from some peculiar and as yet undiscovered law of physics, Reston's nausea still reflects how the often disturbing disorientation experienced within that place, whether acting directly upon the inner ear or the inner labyrinth of the psyche, can have physiological consequences. Fortunately, Reston's nausea does not last long, and he and Navidson can spend the rest of the day pushing deeper and deeper into the labyrinth. Initially, they follow the scant remains of the first team and then continue on by following their instincts. Based on the fact that there was very little evidence of the first team's descent remaining on the stairs, Navidson determines that the neon markers and fishing line last at most 6 days before they are entirely consumed by the house. When they finally make camp, both men are disheartened and exhausted. Nevertheless, each agrees to alternately serve as watch. Navidson takes the first shift, spending his time removing the dark, blotched gauze around his toes, clearly a painful process, before reapplying ointment and a fresh dressing. Reston spends his time tinkering with his chair and the mount on the Ariflex. Except for their own restlessness, neither one hears anything during the night. Toward the end of their second day inside, making this the 9th day since Holloway's team set out into the house, both men seem uncertain whether to continue or return. It is only as they are making camp for the second night that Navidson hears something. A voice, maybe a cry, but so fleeting were it not for Reston's confirmation. It probably would have been shrugged off as just a high note of the imagination. Leaving most of their equipment behind, the two men head out in pursuit of the sound. For 40 minutes they hear nothing and are about to give up when their ears are again rewarded with another distant cry. Based on the rapidly changing video timestamp, we can see another 3 hours passes as they weave in and out of more rooms and corridors, often moving very quickly, though never failing to mark their course with neon arrows and ample amounts of fishing line. At one point, Navidson manages to get Tom on the radio, only to learn that there is something the matter with Karen. Unfortunately, the signal decays before he can get more details. Finally, Reston stops his wheelchair and jabs a finger at a wall. On high 8, we witness his gruff assertion, "How we get through it, I don't have a clue." But that crying's coming from the other side. Searching out more hallways, more turns, Navidson eventually leads the way down a narrow corridor, ending with a door. Navidson and Reston open it, only to discover another corridor ending with another door. Slowly they make their way through a gauntlet of what must be close to 50 doors. It is impossible to calculate the exact number due to the jump cuts, until Navidson discovers for the first and only time a door without a doorknob. Even stranger, as he tries to push the door open, he discovers it is locked. Reston's expression communicates nothing but incredulity. As Navidson pulls away to re-examine the obstacle, he hears a whimper coming from the other side. Taking 2 steps back, he throws his shoulder into the door. It bends but does not give way. He tries again and again, each hit straining the bolt and hinges, until the 4th hit, at last, tears the hinges free, pops whatever bolt held it in place, and sends the door cracking to the floor. Reston keeps the chair-mounted Ariflex trained on Navidson, and while the focus is slightly soft, as the door breaks loose, the frame gracefully accepts Jed's ashen features as he faces what he has come to believe is his final moment. This whole sequence amounts to a pretty ratty collection of cuts, alternating between Jed's high 8 and an equally poor view from the 16mm camera, and Navidson and Reston's high 8s. Nevertheless, what matters most here is adequately captured. The alchemy of social contact, as Jed's rasp of terror almost instantly transforms itself into laughter and sobs of relief. In a scattering of seconds, a 33-year-old man from Vineland, New Jersey, who loves to drink Seattle coffee and listen to Lyle Lovett with his fiancée, learns his sentence has been remitted. He will live. As diligent as any close analysis of these Zapruder film, similar frame-by-frame examination carried out countless times by too many critics to name here, reveals how a fraction of a second later one bullet pierced his upper lip, blasted through the maxillary bone, dislodging, even fragmenting the central teeth. Reel 10, frame 192. And then in the following frame, Reel 10, frame 193, obliterated the backside of his head. Chunks of occipital lobe and parietal bone spewed out in an instantly senseless pattern uselessly preserved in celluloid light. Reel 10, frames 194, 195, 196, 197, 198, 199, 200, 201, 202, 203, 204, and 205. Ample information, perhaps, to track the trajectories of individual skull bits and blood droplets, determine destinations, even origins, but not nearly enough information to actually ever reassemble the shatter. Here, then, the aftermath of meaning. A lifetime finished between the space of the two frames. The dark line where the eye persists in seeing something that was never there. To begin with, Ken Burns has used this particular moment to illustrate why the Navidson record is so beyond Hollywood. Not only is it gritty and dirty and raw, but look how the zoom claws after the fleeting fact. Watch how the frame cannot anticipate the action. Jed's in the lower left-hand corner of the frame. Nothing's predetermined or foreseen. It's all painfully present, which is why it's so painfully real. Jed crumples, his moment of joy stolen by a pinky worth of lead, leaving him dead on the floor, a black pool of blood spilling out of him. In the next shots, mostly from the high 8s, we watch Navidson dragging Wax and Jed out of harm's way while trying at the same time to get Tom on the radio. Reston returns fire with an HK-45. "Since when did you bring a gun?" Navidson asks, crouching near the door. "Are you kidding me? This place is scary." Another shot explodes in the tiny room. Reston wheels back to the edge of the doorway and squeezes off 3 more rounds. This time there is no return fire. He reloads. A few more seconds pass. "I can't see a fucking thing," Reston whispers. Which is true. Neither one of their flashlights can effectively penetrate that far into the black. Navidson grabs his backpack and pulls out his Nikon and the Met strobe with its parabolic mirror. Thanks to this powerful flash, the high 8 can now capture a shadow in the distance. The stills, however, are even more clear, revealing that the shadow is really the blur of a man. Standing dead center, with a rifle in his hand. Then, just as the strobe captures him lifting the weapon, presumably now aiming at the blinding flash, we hear a series of sharp cracks. Neither Navidson nor Reston have any idea where these sounds are coming from, though gratefully the stills reveal what is happening. All those doors behind the man are slamming shut. one after another, after another, which still does not prevent the figure from firing. "Oh, shit," Reston shouts. But Navidson keeps his Nikon steady and focused, the motor chewing up a whole roll of film as the flash angrily slashes out at the prevailing darkness, ultimately capturing this dark form, vanishing behind a closing door. Even though a hole the size of a fist punches through the muntin, the round powerful enough to propel the bullet into the second door, though not powerful enough to do more than splinter a panel. Before this damage, along with even the sound from the blast, disappears behind the roar of more slamming doors, the last one finally hammering shut, leaving the room saturated in silence. Navidson sprints down the corridor to the first door, but can find no way to lock it. "He's alive," Reston whispers. "Navy, come here. Jed's breathing." The camera captures Navidson's POV as he returns to the dying young man. "It doesn't matter, Rest. He's still dead." Whereupon Navidson's eye quickly pans from the thoughtless splatter of grey matter and blood to more pressing things, the groan of the living calling him away from the sigh of the dead. Despite his shoulder wound and loss of blood, Wax is still very much alive. As we can see, a fever, probably due to the onset of an infection, has marooned him in a delirium, and although his rescuers are now at hand, his eyes remain fixed on a horizon that is both empty and meaningless. Navidson's shot of Jed, though brief, is not nearly as short as this shot of Wax. In the next segment, taken at least 50 minutes later at a new location, we see Navidson elevating Wax's legs, cleaning the wound, and gently feeding him half a tablet of a painkiller, probably meperidine. Reston, meanwhile, finishes converting their two-man tent into a makeshift stretcher. Having already arranged the tent poles in a way that will provide the most support, he now uses some pack straps to create two handles, which will enable Navidson to carry the rear end more easily. "What about Jed?" Reston asks, as he begins securing the front end of the stretcher to the back of his wheelchair. "We'll leave his pack and mine behind." "Some habits die hard, huh?" "Or they don't die," replies Navidson. A little later, Navidson gets Tom on the radio and tells him to meet them at the bottom of the stairs. (11) Le poète au cachot des prés maladifs, roulant en manuscrit sur son pied convulsif, mesure d'un regard que la terreur enflamme, l'escalier de vertige où s'abîme son âme. Jean Baudelaire. While Karen stayed home and Will Navidson headed for the front line, Tom spent 2 nights in no man's land. He even brought his bag and papers, though in the long run the effects of the weed would not exactly comfort him. More than likely, when Tom first stepped foot in that place, every instinct in his body screamed at him to immediately get out, race back to the living room, daylight, the happy median of his life. Unfortunately, it was not an impulse he could obey, as he was needed near the spiral staircase, in order to maintain radio contact. By his own admission, Tom is nothing like his brother. He has neither the fierce ambition nor the compulsion for risk-taking. If both brothers paid the same price for their parents' narcissism, Will relied on aggression to anchor the world, while Tom passively accepted whatever the world would give or take away. Consequently, Tom won no awards, achieved no fame, held no job for more than a year or two, remained in no relationship for longer than a few months, could not settle down in a city for longer than a few years, and ultimately had no place or direction to call his own. He drifted, bending to daily pressures, never protesting when he was deprived of what he should have rightfully claimed as his own. And in this sad trip downstream, Tom dulled the pain with alcohol and a few joints a day, what he called his friendly haze. Ironically, though, Tom is better liked than Will, physically as well as emotionally. Tom has far fewer edges than his famous brother. He is soft, easygoing, and he exudes a kind of peacefulness typically reserved for Buddhist monks. Anne Kligman's essay on Tom is nearly poetic in its brevity. In only 1.5 pages, she condenses 53 interviews with Tom's friends, all of whom speak warmly and generously of a man they admittedly did not know all that well, but nonetheless valued and in some cases appear to genuinely love. Will Navidson, on the other hand, is respected by thousands, but has never commanded the kind of gut-level affection felt for his twin brother. A great deal of exegesis exists on the unique relationship between these two brothers, though not the first to make the comparison. Ita Rucala's treatment of Will and Tom as contemporary Esau and Jacob has become the academic standard. Rucala finds the biblical tale of twins wrestling over birthright and paternal blessing the ideal mirror in which to view Will and Tom, who, like Jacob and Esau, sadly came to share the same conclusion. Yip paredu. Incredible as it may seem, Rucala's 900-page book is not 1 page too long. As she says herself, to adequately analyze the history of Esau and Jacob is to painstakingly exfoliate, layer by layer, the most delicate millefeuille. Of course, it is also an act that could, in the end, deprive the reader of all taste for the subject. Rucala accepts this risk, recognizing that an investment in such a complex, and without exception, time-consuming array of ideas will in the end yield a taste far superior to anything experienced casually. In the chapter entitled Vayashol, Vayesht, Vayakom, Vayelech, Vayivaz, Rucala reevaluates the meaning of birthright by treating its significance as nothing more than but the Lord Yahweh, that too oft accused literalist, instructs Rebekah in the subtler ways of language by using irony. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. Genesis 25, 23-24. Chalmers underline. On one hand, Yahweh announces a hierarchy of age, and on the other hand claims the children are the same age. Esau comes from the root ash, meaning to hurry, while Yaakov comes from the root akav, which means to delay or to restrain. I.e., Esau entered the world first, Jacob last. But Esau is also connected to asa, meaning to cover, while Jacob derives from akab, meaning heel, i.e. Esau was covered in hair, Jacob born clutching Esau's heel, restraining him. At least Fried Cachon convincingly objects to Rucala's comparison when he points out how really Holloway, not Tom, is the hairy one. His beard, surly appearance, and even his profession as a hunter make Holloway the perfect Esau. The tension between Navidson and Holloway is also more on par with the tension between Jacob and his brother. The degree of Esau and Jacob's struggle is emphasized by the word va yitrozu, which comes from the root ruz, meaning to tear apart, to shatter. The comparison falters, however, when one realizes Will and Tom never indulged in such a violent struggle. During their childhood, Tom and Will were seldom apart. They gave each other support, encouragement, and the strength to persevere in the face of parental indifference. Of course, their intertwining adolescent years eventually unraveled as they reached adulthood. Will pursuing photography and fame in an attempt to fill the emotional void, Tom drifting into an unremarkable and, for the most part, internal existence. Tom, however, never hid behind the adjunct meaning of a career. He never acquired the rhetoric of achievement. In fact, his life never moved much beyond the here and now. Nevertheless, in spite of a brutal struggle with alcoholism, Tom did manage to preserve his sense of humor and, in his 12-step program, inspired many admirers who to this day speak highly of him. Of the hard times that came his way, he experienced the greatest grief during those 8 years when he was estranged from his brother, or, in his words, when the old rug was pulled out from under old Tom. It is hardly a coincidence that during this period he succumbed to chemical dependencies, went on unemployment, and prematurely ended a budding relationship with a young schoolteacher. The Navidson record never explains what came between Tom and Will, although it implies Tom envied Navy's success and was increasingly dissatisfied with his own accomplishments. In his article, Brothers in Arms No More, published in the Village Voice, Carlos Brion observes that Tom and Will's estrangement began with the birth of Chad. While it's complete speculation on my part, I wonder if the large amount of energy required to raise a family pulled Will's attention away from his brother. Suddenly, Tom discovered his brother, his only supporter and sympathizer, was devoting more and more time to his son. Tom may have felt abandoned. Annabelle Whitten echoes these sentiments when she points out how Tom occasionally referred to himself as orphaned at the age of 40. The year Tom, and Will for that matter, turned 40 was the year Chad was born. Ironically enough, Tom's presence in the house on Ash Tree Lane only served to help Will and Karen get along. As Whitten states, Tom's desire to reacquire his lost parental figures transmuted Navidson into father and Karen into mother, thus offering one explanation why Tom frequently sought to reduce tension between both. Of course, as Nam Yurton argued, why? Because Tom's a nice guy. Esau's blessing was stolen with a mask. Tom wears no mask. Will wears a camera. But as Nietzsche wrote, every profound spirit needs a mask. And yet, despite the triumph of Jacob's ruse, he should have heeded this admonition. Cursed be he that maketh the blind to wander out of the way. Deuteronomy 27:18. And Jacob was indeed cursed, forced to wrestle for the rest of his life with this question of self-worth. Navidson was no different. 3 horizontal lines struck through with a diagonal line. To me, Tom seemed an incredibly peaceful man. Plain, decent, but most of all peaceful. Here Ricala's analysis unexpectedly rereads the meaning of Esau's lost inheritance, sublimely uncovering an unspoken history, veiled in irony and blankness, yet still describing how one brother could not have succeeded without the other. Cain may not have been his brother's keeper, but Esau certainly was. A cunning hunter of the field. Plain man dwelling in tents. This then is the meaning of Esau. As Sholem writes, Frank's ultimate vision of the future was based upon the still unrevealed laws of the Torah of Atzilut, which he promised his disciples would take effect once they had come to Esau, that is, when the passage through the abyss, with its unmitigated destruction and negation, was finally accomplished. But as a great Hasidic maxim reminds us, the Messiah will not come until the tears of Esau have ceased. And so it returns to Tom and Will Navidson, divided by experience, endowed with different talents and dispositions, yet still brothers, and not without the other. As Ricala states in her concluding chapter, while the differences are there, like the serpents of the caduceus, these two brothers have always been, and always will be, inextricably intertwined, and just like caduceus, their shared history creates a meaning, and that meaning is health. By the end of the first night, Tom has begun to feel the terrible strain of that place. At one point, he even threatens to abandon his post. He does not. His devotion to his brother triumphs over his own fears. Remaining by the radio, Tom gnaws on boredom like a dog gnawing on a bone, while all the time eyeing fear like a mongoose. Fortunately for us, some trace of this struggle survives on his high 8, where Tom recorded an eclectic, sometimes funny, sometimes bizarre history of thoughts passing away in the atrocity of that darkness. Tom's story. Transcript. Day 1, 10:38. Outside Tom's tent, breath frosting in the air. Who am I kidding? A place like this has to be haunted. That's what happened to Holloway and his team. The ghosts got him. That's what will happen to Navy and me. The ghosts will get us. Except he's with Reston. He's not alone. I'm alone. That just figures. Ghosts always go first for the one who's alone. In fact, I bet they're here right now, lurking. Day 1, 12:06. In order to maintain contact, it was necessary to set up the radio outside of the tent. Radio, Navidson. Tom, we found another neon marker. Most of it's gone, just a shred. We're laying down line and proceeding. Tom into radio. Okay, Navy. See any ghosts? Radio, Navidson. Nothing. You a little spooked? Tom, lighting up a fat one. Radio, Navidson. If it gets too much for you, go back. We'll be all right. Tom, fuck yourself, Navy. Radio, Navidson. What? Tom, doesn't he go around autographing light bulbs? Radio, Navidson. Who? Tom, what? Radio, Navidson. What? Tom, never mind. Over, out, whatever. Changing channels. Tom, Karen, this is Tom. Radio, Karen. I would hope so. How's Navy? Tom, he's fine. Found another marker. Radio, Karen. And Billy? Tom, fine too. Radio, Karen. How are you managing? Tom, me? I'm cold. I'm scared shitless. And I feel like I'm about to be eaten alive at any moment. Otherwise, I'd say I'm fine. Day 1, 15:46. American listeners will have to deal with army time. Inside tent. Okay, Mr. Monster, I know you're there and you're planning to eat me, and there's nothing I can do about that. But I should warn you, I've lived for years on fast food, greasy fries, more than a few polyurethane shakes. I smoke a lot of weed, too. Got a pair of lungs blacker than road tar. My point being, Mr. Monster, I don't taste so good. Day 1, 18:38, outside tent. This is ridiculous. I don't belong here. No one belongs here. Fuck you, Navy, for bringing me here. I'm a slob. I like lots of food. These things I consider accomplishments. I am not a hero. I'm not an adventurer. I am Tom the Slow, Tom the Chunky, Tom the Stoned, Tom about to be eaten by Mr. Monster. Where are you, Mr. Monster, you stinking bastard? Sleeping on the job? Day 1, 21:09, outside tent. I'm sick. I'm freezing to death. I'm going. He throws up. This is not fun. This isn't fair. Pause. I think there's a game on tonight. Day 1, 23:41. Outside tent. Tom. What kind of voices? Radio Karen. Daisy doesn't know. Chad said they sounded like a few people, but he couldn't understand what they were saying. Tom. Book me a flight to the Bahamas. Radio Karen. Are you kidding? Book a flight for the whole family. This is absurd. Tom. Where's that bottle of bourbon when you need it? Pause. Hey, I better sign off. Don't want a bunch of dead batteries on my hands. Radio Karen. Tell him I love him, Tom. Tom. I already did. Day 2, 11 after midnight. Outside tent, smoking a joint. I call this a little bedtime story for Tom. A long time ago, there was this captain, and he was out sailing the high seas when one of his crew spotted a pirate ship on the horizon. Right before the battle began, the captain cried out, "Bring me my red shirt." It was a long fight, but in the end, the captain and his crew were victorious. The next day, 3 pirate ships appeared. Once again, the captain cried out, "Bring me my red shirt," and once again, the captain and his men defeated the pirates. That evening, everyone was sitting around, resting and taking care of their wounds, when an ensign asked the captain why he always put on his red shirt before battle. The captain calmly replied, "I wear the red shirt so that if I'm wounded, no one will see the blood. That way everyone will continue to fight on unafraid." All the men were moved by this great display of courage. Well, the next day, 10 pirate ships were spotted. The men turned to their captain and waited for him to give his usual command. Calm as ever, the captain cried out, "Bring me my brown pants." Day 2, 10:57. Inside tent. Radio Navidson. Tom? Static. Tom, you read me? Tom, going outside to the radio. What time is it? Looking at his watch. 11 a.m. Jesus, did I sleep well. Radio Navidson. Still no sign, except for... Static. Marcus... Static. Over. Tom. Say again, Navy. You're fading. Day 2, 12:03. Outside tent. This punker gets on a bus and takes a seat. His hair is all green. He's got brightly colored tattoos covering his arms and piercings all over his face. Feathers hang from each earlobe. Across the aisle sits an old man who proceeds to stare at him for the next 15 miles. Eventually, the punker gets pretty unnerved and blurts out, "Hey man, didn't you do anything crazy when you were young?" Without missing a beat, the old man replies, "Yeah, when I was in the Navy, I got drunk one night in Singapore and had sex with a bird of paradise. I was just wondering if you were my son." Day 2, 13:27. Outside tent. I feel like I'm in a goddamned refrigerator, that's what. So what I want to know is, where's all the goddamn food? God knows I could use a drink. Day 2, 14:11. Inside tent. A monk joins an abbey, ready to dedicate his life to copying ancient books by hand. After the first day, though, he reports to the head priest. He's concerned that all the monks have been copying from copies made from still more copies. If someone makes a mistake, he points out, it would be impossible to detect. Even worse, the error would continue to be made. A bit startled, the priest decides that he better check their latest effort against the original, which is kept in a vault beneath the abbey, a place only he has access to. Well, 2 days, then 3 days pass without the priest resurfacing. Finally, the new monk decides to see if the old guy's all right. When he gets down there, though, he discovers the priest hunched over both a newly copied book and the ancient original text. He is sobbing, and by the look of things has been sobbing for a long time. "Father," the monk whispers. "Oh, Lord Jesus," the priest wails. "The word is celebrate." Day 2, 15:29. Outside tent, smoking a joint. Coughing. Coughing again. Did you expect oration, Mr. Monster? Or maybe just a little expectoration? Coughs and spits. Navy taught me that one. Day 2, 1549, outside tent. Tom. Hey, Karen, I've got a bit of the munchies going on here. Do you think you could order me a pizza? Radio Karen. What? Tom. When the delivery boy comes to the door, just tell him to take it to the fat guy at the end of the hall, 2 miles down on the left. Radio Karen. Pause. Tom, maybe you should come back. Tom. No maybe about it. Is there any lemon meringue left? Day 2, 1601, inside tent. There once was a poor man who walked around without shoes. His feet were covered in calluses. One day, a rich man felt sorry for the poor man and bought him a pair of Nikes. The poor man was extremely grateful and wore the shoes constantly. Well, after a year or so, the shoes fell apart. So the poor man had to go back to running around barefoot. Only now all his calluses were gone and his feet got all cut up. And soon the cuts became infected and the man got sick, and eventually, after they cut off his legs, he died. I call that particular story Love, Death, and Nike. A real cheer-me-up story for Mr. Monster. That's right. All for you. Oh, and something else. Fuck you, Mr. Monster. Day 2, 1642. Outside tent. The 7 dwarves went to the Vatican, and when the Pope answered the door, Dopey stepped forward. Your Excellency, he said, I wonder if you could tell me if there are any dwarf nuns in Rome. No, Dopey, there aren't, the Pope replied. Behind Dopey, the 6 dwarves started to titter. Well, are there any dwarf nuns in Italy? Dopey persisted. No, none in Italy, the Pope answered, a little more sternly. A few of the dwarves now began to laugh more openly. Well, are there any dwarf nuns in Europe? This time the Pope was much more firm. Dopey, there are no dwarf nuns in Europe. By this point, all the dwarves were laughing aloud and rolling around on the ground. Pope, Dopey demanded, are there any dwarf nuns in the whole world? No, Dopey, the Pope snapped. There are no dwarf nuns anywhere in the world. Whereupon the 6 dwarves started jumping up and down, chanting, Dopey fucked a penguin, Dopey fucked a penguin. Day 2, 1716, outside tent. Here's a riddle. Who makes a better house? A framer, a welder, a form builder? Give up? A grave maker, because his house lasts until Judgment Day. Okay, that's a stupid joke. An old Sunday school joke, actually. Day 2, 1828, inside tent. Now Mr. Monster looks like a frog, a little gribbit frog, when suddenly, little frog has become a piglet. By carefully positioning his halogen lamp, Tom is able to cast hand shadows on the back wall of his tent. He conjures up a whole menagerie of creatures. Yes, a piggy-wiggy creature just oinking along when, an elephant. Look at that, the piglet has turned into an elephant. Jesus, and look at the size of that elephant. It could, it's turned into a woodpecker. Oh, now it's a snail. Or how about a praying mantis, a sea urchin? A dove, maybe? A tiger? Or even this, a wascoey wabbit. And then all of a sudden, oh no, Mr. Monster, don't do that. But Mr. Monster does, turning into a dragon. Yep, that's right, folks. A mean, no-game-playing, flesh-eating dragon. And you say you want to eat me? Sure, except for one thing. Just when Mr. Monster thinks he's going to turn Tom the Hefty into Tom the Short Rib, Tom unleashes his secret weapon. As the dragon on the tent wall turns toward Tom and opens its mouth, Tom gets ready to turn off the halogen with his foot. Aha, Mr. Monster! Bye-bye, baby. Click. Black. Day 2, 1904. Outside tent, smoking another joint. Enough. I've had enough. Man, this is just not fair. Day 2, 2003. Outside tent. Radio, Navidson. Static. We hear something. Noise. Going. Noise. Turret. Tom. Good luck, bro. Silence. Day 2, 21:54. Outside tent. Radio, Karen. I'm scared, Tom. Tom. What's the matter? Are the kids all right? Radio, Karen. No, they're okay. I think they're okay. Daisy stays in her room. Chad prefers being outside. Who can argue with that? It's something else. Tom. What? Radio, Karen. All my feng shui. Oh Christ, this whole thing doesn't make any sense. How are Navy and Billy doing? Have they found anything? When are they coming back? Tom. They heard someone crying. I didn't get it all because the reception was so poor. From what I can gather, they're fine. Radio, Karen. Well, I'm not. I don't like being here alone, Tom. In fact, I'm fucking fed up with being alone. She starts crying. I don't like being scared all the time, wondering if he's going to be all right, then wondering if I'm going to be all right if he's not, knowing I won't be. I'm so tired of being frightened like this. I've had enough, Tom. I really have. After this, I'm leaving. I'm taking the kids and I'm going. This wasn't necessary. It could have been avoided. We didn't need to go through all this. Tom, gently. Karen, wait a minute. Just back up for a second. First, tell me what you were saying about your feng shui stuff. Radio, Karen. Pause. The objects. I put all these objects around the house. You remember, to improve the energy or some such shit. Tom. Sure. Crystals and bullfrogs. Goldfish and dragons. Radio, Karen. Tom, they're all gone. Tom. What do you mean? Radio, Karen, crying harder. They disappeared. Tom. Hey, Karen, come on. Did you ask Daisy and Chad? Maybe they took them. Radio, Karen. Tom, they're the ones who told me. They wanted to know why I'd gotten rid of it all. Day 2, 22:19. Outside tent. Radio, Navidson. How's Karen? Static. Tom. Not so good, Navy. She's pretty scared. You should get back here. Radio, Navidson. What? Static. 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 Hear you. Tom. Navy. Navy. Static. Day 2, 23:07. Outside tent. This is such bullshit. You hear me, Mr. Monster? Bullshit. What kind of house do you got here anyway? No lights, no central heating, not even any plumbing. I've been shitting in a corner and pissing on a wall for 2 days, getting louder. Doesn't that irk you a little, Mr. Monster? I've been shitting in your corner. I've been pissing on your wall. Then softer. Of course, the piss is dried up and the crap just vanishes. You gobble it all up, don't you? Turtles. Shit, doesn't matter to you. Loud again. Indiscriminate bastard. Doesn't it make you sick? It makes me sick. Makes me want to retch. Long series of echoes. Day 3, 49 after midnight. Outside tent, reaching into his Ziploc bag for the last joint. And all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. Not even you, Mr. Monster. Just Tom, poor old Tom, who was doing plenty of stirring around this house until finally he went stir crazy, wishing there was a creature, any creature, even a mouse. Day 3, 54 after midnight. Radio, Navidson. Bang. We're in shit now. Static. Tom. Navy, what's happening? I can barely hear you. Radio, Navidson. Jed's been shot. He's Static. Tom. Shot? By who? Radio. Pop, pop, pop. Reston. I can't see a fucking thing. Crack, 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 crack. Reston. Oh, shit. Crack, bang, crack, 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 crack. Tom. What the hell was that? Radio Navidson. Tom. Static. Static. I'm gonna... Static. 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 Wax. We have to... Shit. Static. Tom. I'm losing you, Navy. Radio Navidson. Static. Tom. Navy, do you read me? Over. Day 3, 1:28, outside tent. Radio Navidson. Static. It's probably going to take us a good 8 hours to make it back to the stairs. Tom, I need you to meet me at the bottom. Static. We need help. We can't carry them up ourselves. Also, you're... Static. 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 E2. Static. A doctor. Static. Static. Day 3, 7:39. Outside tent. Tom looks down the spiral staircase, ignites a light stick and drops it. Are you down there, Mr. Monster? Below, the light stick flickers and dies. Tom recoils. No way, not gonna happen, Navy. I've been alone in this shithole for almost 3 days, and now you want me to go down there alone. No way. Tom descends a few steps, then quickly retreats. No can do. Tom tries again, makes it down to the first flight. There, that's not so bad. Fuck you, Mr. Monster. Yeah, fuck you. Then, as Tom starts down the second flight, the stairs suddenly stretch and drop 10 feet. Tom looks up and sees the circular shape of the stairwell bend into an ellipse before snapping back to a circle again. Tom's breathing gets noticeably more rapid. You are here, aren't you, Mr. Monster? A pause, and then out of nowhere comes that growl, more like a roar, almost deafening, as if it originated right next to Tom. Tom panics and sprints back up the stairs. The shot from the camcorder instantly becomes an incoherent blur of walls, banisters, and the dim light thrown by the halogen. A minute later, Tom reaches the top. Day 3, 7:53, outside tent. Tom. Karen. Radio Karen. Are you all right? Tom. I'm coming in. A short analysis of Tom's story. How does one approach this quirky sequence? What does it reveal about Tom? What does it say about the Navidson record? For one thing, Navidson edited this segment months later. No doubt, what would soon take place deeply influenced the way he treated the material. As Nietzsche wrote, "It is our future that lays down the law of our today." All throughout Tom's story, Navidson tenderly focuses on Tom's mirth and his ability to play in the halls of hell, those dolorous mansions of isolation, fear, and doubt. He captures his brother trying to help Karen and him with their foundering relationship, and he reveals Tom's surprising strength in the face of such utter darkness and cold. There is nothing hasty about Tom's story. Navidson has clearly put an enormous amount of work into these few minutes. Despite obvious technological limitations, the cuts are clean and sound beautifully balanced, with the rhythm and order of every shot only serving to intensify even the most ordinary moment. This is a labor of love, a set-piece sibling to Karen's short film on Navidson. Perhaps because Tom's antics are so amusing and so completely permeated with warmth, we could easily miss how hand shadows, an abundance of bad jokes, and the birth of Mr. Monster ultimately come to mean sorrow. If sorrow is deep regret over someone loved, there is nothing but regret here, as if Navidson with his great eye had for the first time seen what over the years he never should have missed, or should have missed all along.